Jennifer Wandry. I'm Associate State Director of Outreach and Advocacy for AARP in Houston. We are sharing this webinar throughout our state. So thank you to SVP, who is our partner and the presenter today. As you know, AARP advocates for older adults to choose how they live as they age. One of the places that we try to focus on is public safety, which disaster resilience and all the disaster related subtopics falls under for us. So this is session 3 of the series of building a culture of preparedness for older adults, serving older adults, serving groups and individuals. So this one is focused on tips to navigating disaster recovery. We wanted to share it with the entire state because we know that unfortunately some of our state is still recovering from the recent flooding in Hill Country and just various disasters that have gone through. So so thank you for taking the time to be here today with us, and we'll get started. So one of the resources that we have available for everyone is our Disaster Resilience Toolkit. This is a great resource for anyone that's a local leader and is thinking of older adults as you plan for disasters. It's completely free. At the link here, you can download it and actually request copies of it. And it's a really good resource, completely free. You don't have to be a member to have access to this. So, and I'll pass it over to Tessa now, and she'll keep it going. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today. And as folks continue to trickle in, my name is Tessa Barron. I am SVP's Disaster Preparedness Program Associate. And like Jennifer said, this is session 3 in our 3-part webinar series where we've really been focused on how to best prepare as individuals, as older adult individuals for disasters. And so today we're going to go into some of those top tips. But first, I want to just take a moment and share a little bit about SBP and who we are as an organization. And then we'll go ahead and get into our specific top tips. We are a disaster resilience and recovery nonprofit, and we got our start in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, so 2 decades ago at this point. In our early days, we focused solely on rebuilding, on getting folks back home, getting families and individuals back into safe, sanitary, and secure housing. Well, in the 2 decades since our organization began, we've realized that with our main mission being to shrink the time between disaster and recovery, really to reduce the amount of time that folks are displaced from home, then we have to be proactive and we have to get ahead of the storm. What that means is that we need to start thinking about disaster preparedness and building long-term resilience for future events. And so you can see here at a high level, I'm sharing an overview of our organization's main program areas. And as you can see from our start with just building, rebuilding new, we've really expanded out the scope of our operations and the ways that we seek to help communities and households and leaders of communities at various levels. As you can see here, we really aim to touch the full disaster cycle from preparedness all the way to, response, recovery, and building resilience. And again, the point there being we want to get folks thinking about resilience, give folks the tools and information they need to make more informed preparedness decisions. And so I just want to share a little bit about our preparedness program, since myself and my colleague Leanne, who we will be both giving the presentation today, we are in our disaster preparedness program, and we'll be sharing our contact information once we wrap up if folks have questions and want to learn a little bit more. But in our preparedness program, in SCP as a whole, we understand that there will be another disaster. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so what's most critical is that we share out knowledge, tools, resources, information, trainings, etc., to get folks thinking about disaster preparedness so you can make more informed decisions and ultimately stay safe when we deal with future disaster events. And so at a high level here, I just wanted to share out, we work across a variety of different stakeholder sets. So one being the folks on the call today, we work with households. This includes both homeowners and renters. We do a lot of work also with community leaders and with businesses of various sizes, understanding that in order to build a community that's prepared for disasters, we have to touch on each facet and give each of these different stakeholder sets the information they need to get prepared. And so we have, and we'll be dropping links in the chat throughout the presentation today, but we have a really robust resource hub that has a variety of different preparedness and recovery resources. So this includes things like the sample guides on the slide here. We also have videos. We record a lot of our training sessions. We have, for example, a series of videos that are 5 quick tips on different disaster preparedness topics. So that's a nice starting point. That's just a few minutes long to get you thinking about disaster preparedness topics. But all that being said, we really encourage after we wrap up our session today that folks check out our resources and continue on your journey to becoming more prepared. And I'll just share out. And so as we're getting into the training today, what we're going to be looking at is a couple of different things that we really hope will get you on the path to becoming more prepared. One, we're going to start off our session today by looking at preparedness basics. And so we'll look at things like disaster risks and how those are evolving over time. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about making a kit, making that emergency plan so you have what you need to stay safe when a disaster strikes. And then we'll spend some time talking about different things that you can do to protect your home. From there, we're going to spend the bulk of the presentation talking about recovery. A huge part of being prepared for disasters is knowing how to recover should one occur. And so we'll look at important documents, how to best protect them. We'll spend some time talking about financial preparedness for disasters and how to build financial resilience. And a huge part of that is getting the right insurance. And then we'll wrap up by talking about avoiding contractor fraud and some wrap up tips that'll become useful in the recovery process. Before we get into it here, I just wanted to share out an example of one of our stories from our clients at SVP. So again, a lot of the work that we do and how we got our start in the disaster space is through rebuilding. And so we've worked with a lot of different clients. Many of those clients are in Houston. And so I wanted to showcase this story of Miss Dorothy Fisher and her family. They have been living in Houston for a long time, over 50 years. And unfortunately, the family was impacted by Hurricane Harvey. When, news came that the storm was incoming, the family decided to shelter in place and not evacuate, which ended up being pretty problematic because they unfortunately did not have everything they needed to stay safe or safe to the best of their ability during the disaster. They didn't have a generator. And so what that meant was they lost electricity for an extended period of time. Losing electricity can happen at any time throughout the year with any type of disaster, but it's especially problematic for older adult individuals who maybe have different battery powered life-saving devices or different medications that need to be refrigerated, anything along those lines. And so this really posed a pretty severe problem. Luckily, though, for Miss Dorothy Fisher and her family, only the outside of the house faced some damage, and so they were able to stay relatively safe throughout the storm. But as time passed, they didn't have the financial resources to fix those external repairs that needed to be made, and so that left them vulnerable to future disasters. And that's when we met Miss Dorothy, and when SVP was able to provide support, and what we were able to do was bring in a fortified roof, which was able to help her and her family withstand future disaster events, since those are built to higher standards and they're able to withstand different types of disaster events. And so all of this to say, this was a really impactful and really tough experience for Miss Dorothy and her family. But she does say that she's, so grateful for the opportunity that she's now safe, and she is really going to take all the action that she can to prevent this from happening in the future. And so what that looks like is taking preparedness actions and building future resilience. And so now I'm going to pass over to my colleague Leanne to get us started on our preparedness basics.
Thank you, Tessa, and good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Ortiz, Community Preparedness Engagement Manager, and also based out of Houston. So happy to be here with y'all today. So in this section, we're going to discuss preparedness basics, in other words, where you should be getting started and helpful guidance on how to prepare properly, similar to what Tessa was sharing. Next slide. So we're going to start off with understanding our risks because, as you all might have already noticed, disaster risks are evolving and very quickly, right? Next slide, please. So it's no longer about traditional high-risk zones, which is something that we hear a lot in Houston, especially. We're seeing a really big shift nationally. Extreme weather events are becoming more often, they're getting stronger. And what's even more concerning is that communities previously considered low risk are now finding themselves increasingly vulnerable. So just consider this, and you can turn to like the bottom corner of the screen here. Between 2011 and 2024, 40 states, that's 80% of the US, experienced 10 or more major disaster declarations. That's just not a handful of isolated events. It's in 28 of those states, every county, including urban, coastal, inland, every county faced at least one major disaster. That shows just how widespread the impacts have become over the years. So the big question here is, how do we keep up with this shifting reality? And a good starting point is using the right tools. So, for example, you can use FEMA's National Risk Index, which is an accessible way to get a snapshot of your community's most significant hazards. And you can also search your local emergency management office, which in Greater Houston, we're lucky to have a really good one, which has a specific guidance on preparedness resources tailored specifically to the different areas in Houston. So remember that at the end of the day, if you have access to the right information, which we do, we just need to go look for it. It can help us make better decisions at the end of the day to prepare on how we respond to a disaster and also how we recover from it. Next slide, please. So we're going to pause here for a moment and we're going to take a closer look at what disaster risks are currently looking like in the Greater Houston area. So over the last 41 years, Greater Houston has experienced 26 federally declared disasters. So 8 of those are just since 2015. And I want to point out that those are only disasters that receive federal declarations. Because you probably heard 26 and you're like, I'm pretty sure that I've lived over 26 in the Greater Houston area in the last couple of years. And in the top left corner, we have a blue map, and it's from Risk Factor, which shows us the Sunnyside neighborhood, which is in South Houston. And that shade of blue is indicating that there's a major flood risk. And as you can see, it covers much of the surrounding vicinity. Now, if we look to the top right corner, you see Harris County highlighted in red. And that's from the FEMA's National Risk Index. So in the last slide, we saw a snapshot nationally of the US, continental US, and now we're like narrowing down on Harris County. And this index, what it does is it provides insight into our community disaster risk nationwide. And as you can see, Harris County is very high risk compared to other US counties or communities. So as of yesterday, as many of you know, it's been 8 years since Hurricane Harvey, a disaster whose impact is still lingering. There's many individuals that are still recovering from it, believe it or not. And not just Harvey, been a lot of subsequent disasters as well. We have the major floods that happened earlier this year. Last year we had the derecho, we had Beryl, historical flooding as well. And according to the Greater Houston Community Foundation, 1 in 7 homes in the area is projected to face substantial flood risk by 2050. That paints a clear picture of the ongoing and future challenges that we're facing in this region. And again, we recommend you to use resources just like Risk Factor, again, your local emergency management pages such as Ready Harris, and then also FEMA's National Risk Index. There you can plug in your address and better understand your local risk. Next slide, please. So by using the resources we just reviewed to determine your individual and community risks, you're going to gain insight into what your current and future risks look like. However, it's very important that you take time to stay informed about imminent risk and gain crucial understanding about how to take quick action and staying safe. So we encourage you to take benefits of your local weather apps or your news apps, having a powered NOAA weather radio with you just in case signal is lost or your phone dies or just anything happens. And keeping different apps like FEMA and honestly, my personal favorite, the Red Cross Emergency app. This is going to let you monitor different locations at once, and it has integrated learning ability. So that way you can learn about the different risks in your area. So for example, if there's a severe thunderstorm, it's going to tell you what it is, how you can prepare for it. And it's also good to helping educate your family and friends around it as well. And then another essential tool, which we'll mention a couple of times through here, is making sure that you're signing up for your city's alert system. So whether you're in the Greater Houston area, whether you're in a different location in Texas, maybe you're in a different state, make sure that you're signing up for your county's or state alert system. So in the case for the Greater Houston area, that would be Alert Houston. And a lot of these systems, what they do is that they offer a range of critical information, whether that be weather updates, public health, special events, emergencies. So make sure today that you're signed up. If you haven't received anything in a while and you signed up a couple years ago, make sure that you're re-registering just in case, so that you're aware of everything that's going on. Next slide, please. So in the great state of Texas, we have the STEER program, which is the State of Texas Emergency Assistance Registry. It is a free voluntary registry for Texans who may need extra assistance during an emergency, including those with disabilities, access or functional needs, medical conditions, transportation challenges, or just those who are elderly. STEER is going to help local emergency management know where additional support may be needed in their community. However, it is very important for you to understand that registering is not going to guarantee assistance before or during a disaster or even after. Instead, think of STEER as a tool to help officials plan more effectively and improve services locally. So if you know of someone in Texas who can benefit from registering, again, whether they have any of these needs or are elder, please encourage them to sign up. And also remember or note that registration needs to be renewed each year. So it's a good idea to set up a calendar reminder. So if you're registering today, setting your calendar an annual reminder so you can make sure that you're good to go. Next slide. So if you see here, if you go to Houston OEM, that's the page for Houston's Office of Emergency Management, you can actually register for both Alert Houston and STEER all in the same place. Thank you. Okay, and now I'll pass it over to Tessa.
All right, thanks, Leanne. And now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about making your kit and putting your plan into place. And as we go through these next slides, I wanted to just start here by sharing some emergency planning basics. So again, we'll talk through in the next slide disaster supplies. We'll share some top examples of different basic necessities that we really encourage folks to have in their kit. We'll talk a little bit more about communication and information. Leanne just did a nice job of setting the foundation of different emergency alert systems and apps and different things that we want to stay plugged into in advance of a disaster so we can get information on incoming hazards as they are coming. And when a disaster strikes, it's important that we have both a plan for evacuation and for sheltering. That way, whatever our local officials direct us to do, whether that's staying at home and hunkering down or evacuating and getting out of harm's way, we have a plan in place and we know what we need to do to stay safe. So here is a list, and this is just a starting point of some basic necessities that we really want to encourage folks to compile before a disaster. A couple call outs that I want to make here are one, non-perishable food and bottled water. Our top recommendation is to save between 2 to 3 weeks worth of supplies. And that way you have what you need. If a disaster does strike for a sufficient period of time, you have, again, food and water and things that you need to stay nourished and healthy. Medications and different medical items are a critical item to point out here. We recommend, though we know it's not always possible, but if possible, to have at least a month of extra medication in case, for example, if a disaster strikes and you're not able to get to your local pharmacy, you don't have to worry, you have your backup that you can utilize. Additional things to consider here for your kits that you might not consider right off the bat are a complete list of any medications that you're taking and contact information for any doctors that you see, whether it's on a regular basis, once a year, whatever that looks like. Want to make sure you have that contact information safeguarded and that you can easily access it during a disaster. Any assistive devices that you may need, hearing aids, canes, walkers, etc. For me, if I did not include contacts or contact lenses, glasses, etc., I would be in bad shape. So this is a critical item that has to go in my kit. Other things we want folks to be thinking about are things like flashlights, batteries, battery-powered radios, and extra batteries. There's that theme here. We want to have those backups. That's important because, again, having a way to stay plugged into information sources so that way you can take the right action to stay safe during a disaster is going to go a long way to keep you and your family safe. I'll harken back to our client story in the beginning of the session. If you recall, Miss Fisher and her family did not have a generator or another backup power source, and that left them without electricity for an extended period of time. So these are all things that we want to be thinking about having in our kits. Another important call out to make here is that this is a starting point. And so these are some basic necessities. And we do have a checklist that we have available on our website that you can print for free and then use that as you're compiling your kits, checking off different items as you go. But again, this is a starting point. We want to make sure that whatever your unique needs are, whatever those unique needs are of your family, if you have young kids, if you have, extended family staying with you, if you have pets, whatever that looks like, those needs are reflected in your kit so it, can help your family stay safe during a disaster. So this is a little starter on your disaster supplies. From there, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about your emergency plan. And that's because when we're in a disaster period, it can be hectic. There's a lot going on. And so we want to have a plan already in place. We want to know what our roles are, what actions we need to take. We want to have it memorized like muscle memory. So that way we don't have to stop, think, figure out what we have to do, waste any precious time. We know exactly what actions we need to take, and any family members, if we live with family members or roommates, etc. So the first one here, and we just spent a little bit of time talking about our emergency supplies. Our action here is that at least once a year, so on an annual basis, we want to make sure that we are checking out our kit. We're looking to see if it's fully stocked, and we're restocking any items that might be missing. Again, Leanne just walked us through some emergency apps, some alert systems, etc., things that we want to have downloaded on our phone. Well, our action here is that we want to have downloaded them before disasters strike. And not only download them, but familiarize yourself with how these different apps and alert systems work. So that way you're not struggling and scrambling, during an emergency period to download apps when, we might be dealing with issues like a power outage or, things like that. We want to have these apps and things downloaded already and they're ready to go. And this is going to help us do the third thing here of staying connected, staying plugged into emergency alerts, emergency information. And so that way we can heed the advice of local authorities so we can best keep ourselves, our families, and our properties safe during a disaster. Leanne also just talked us through STEER. And so it's really critical to understand what resources like the STEER are available for you before a disaster. And so you can get yourself set up so you can potentially receive support during an emergency. We spent a little bit of time when we looked through emergency basics talking about the importance of having an evacuation plan and a shelter-in-place plan. Well, where this comes into play is your emergency plan. You need to know where you need to go, what actions you need to take to stay safe during a crisis are. And so it's certainly a critical component of your planning efforts. Additionally, we want to make sure that we are staying well connected with our network, whether that's family, friends, in town, out of town, neighbors that you might need to check up on. And so understanding who is your network, who can you rely on for support, who can you support, and how can you make sure that you are sharing information with your loved ones about what you're doing and if you're safe and if you need any support, etc., during a disaster. And then lastly, practicing that emergency plan, again, is going to help make it muscle memory so we can be as efficient during a disaster as possible. And we don't lose any time trying to determine now who is going to be the one to restock the supplies, who is going to be the one to check the emergency apps. Again, we want to know what our roles and responsibilities are in advance. And the best way to do that is to practice your plan and to keep your plan up to date as well. And so now we'll shift and we'll talk about protecting your home, and I'll pass it back to Leanne.
Thank you, Tessa. So protecting your home, adding to the list of things that you should be doing, is a year-round job. So catching things early more often than not is going to be it's going to be easier for you and also easier on your pocket most of the time as well. So there are many, many inspection and maintenance actions, as you probably know, that you can take. So we're going to be going over a couple of quick essential ones to take. And then again, understand it's going to depend whether you're a homeowner, a renter, and what type of housing do you live? Is it an apartment? Is it a single family home? Is it a townhome? It all looks very different. So we're going to start indoors. Make sure that you're inspecting your heating, cooling systems, your water heaters to make sure that they're functioning properly. Especially in summer, you want to make sure those cooling systems are good in place. And now as we're going into fall and winter, making sure that those heating elements are also in good functioning order. Make sure that you're changing your furnace filters regularly and to make sure that you keep your air clean and systems very efficient. Make sure that you're checking your caulking, your weather stripping, your insulation. Again, this is all going to help prevent drafts and water leaks. And this is also a good action that you can take maybe when you're cleaning your home over the weekend. Look around. Where are you seeing light? Maybe where you shouldn't be seeing light. Where are you feeling air where you shouldn't be feeling air? Those type of things. Now, going on outdoors, make sure that you're cleaning debris from your property and trimming dead and overhanging tree limbs that could cause damage during a storm. Make sure that you're inspecting and securing outdoor structures like fences or any sheds that you may have. Watch for signs of movement or wear in sloped areas. Maybe you have a patio, maybe there's a retaining wall. If anything looks off, consider getting it checked out by a professional. Finally, clean out your gutters and downspouts. I know this is not something fun to do, but make sure that they're properly attached and also draining away from your home. And lastly, when it comes to roof inspections, they're essential. So make sure that you're also marking your calendar to do this, if not monthly, maybe every 2 to 3 months. Maybe you're doing it quarterly. Look for those loose shingles, any damage flashing, signs of wear, especially around vents and skylights. If you're a renter, make sure that you're clarifying with your landlord who handles maintenance and also that you're reporting any issues promptly. And then once you're indoors, I'm going to say it, you need to go into the attic. You need to check for those leaks, like water stains on the ceilings, peeling paint, or discoloration. I know it's not a fun place to be, but again, set it in your calendar, something to do, and check out. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to quick actions you can take before emergencies. These actions are going to help you before a storm or a disaster reduce damage, oftentimes save money, and also avoid unnecessary stress. So start by placing sandbags at entry points and moving valuable or replaceable items like documents, electronics, food, and sentimental belongings off the ground floor to protect them from water or debris. In storm shutters early. You do not want to wait until strong winds start. So make sure that you're also bringing outdoor items such as furniture, toys, tools, anything that can come inside. If it cannot be brought inside, make sure that you're securely fastening them to prevent them from becoming dangerous projectiles, not just for yourself, but also for neighbors. If you can, unplug any non-essential electrical appliances to protect them from power surges, or you can also put them on surge protectors. And then when we're talking about high wind events, closing interior doors can actually reduce the pressure on your roof by 30%. And this can also prevent a major structural damage on it. In the case for wildfires, which we know different areas in Texas and neighboring states do experience this, those same closed doors can help limit the flow of oxygen, slow the spread of fire, reduce smoke and ash infiltration. So make sure that you're doing that, but also leaving them unlocked in case emergency services or first responders need to access your home. Before you evacuate or shelter, in the case of a wildfire, make sure that you're turning on all indoor and outdoor lights to make your home easier to locate in heavy smoke or darkness, and that you're shutting off your heating, air conditioning, and ceiling fans to stop the circulation of smoke and debris. Again, all these steps are not guarantees, but they can honestly make a very big difference when something is happening. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go over a couple of mitigation actions you can consider for your homes, and this is going to be based on your needs, your risk, and your budget. This is why it's so important to do that first step of understanding what your risks are. Some of these actions can be elevating your home. You can raise your mechanicals, like maybe the HVAC unit that's outside. You can replace carpet with tiles, at least on that first floor. You can protect outdoor utilities or any service equipment. Or you can even consider installing a fortified roof, similar to what Tessa mentioned. And fortified roofs, they withstand high winds, hail, water damage. And the difference with them is that mainly it's that they have a different nailing pattern and a different use of materials. So consider looking into what fortified looks like for your home. So learn about different ways that you can do mitigation, get different incentives, or look into whether other options could be good for your area. You can look at disastersafety.org or smarthomeamerica.org. Next slide, please. So it's very important for us to highlight here that at times taking these mitigation actions in your home can not just improve your home's resiliency by reducing those risks, but also it can reduce your insurance premium, which honestly sounds great too, right? So for example, for individuals who elevate their home, consider getting an elevation certificate, as should also reduce your insurance premium. With that said, again, please check with your insurance agent to discuss what that might look like for your home. And if you're in the state of Texas or even other states, check what mitigation discounts, tax savings can look like by visiting smarthomeamerica.org. Next slide. And then I'll pass it over to Tessa, who's going to be talking about recovery planning.
All right, thanks, Leanne. And so shifting gears to talking about recovery planning, we're first going to look at protecting important documents. This is so important of an exercise to consider doing before disaster strikes because organizing and safeguarding your documents is going to go a long way in speeding up the process of one, submitting an insurance claim post-disaster or applying for federal aid. And so again, anything that we can do to expedite the process post-disaster and get you back in good repair after an event is going to go a long way. When we look at the different types of categories and important things to safeguard, we typically categorize this in a few different buckets. One, personal identification documents. Two, household documents. And I should say, when it comes to personal identification, think about things like your driver's license, marriage certificate, social security card, things like that. Household documents is going to be a lot of contact information. And so, as you can see here, having contact information is very critical when it comes to disaster preparedness and recovery. You need to be able to stay well connected with your network. Financial and legal records, we're going to look actually in the next slide at a deep dive of some of those examples there. Medical information, this is so important because after an event, you may not be seen by your typical provider. And so in order to get the best and most comprehensive care that you can, it's absolutely critical to have your history, information about different prescriptions, et cetera, on hand. And I'll make a call out here that a top tip is many folks on the call might be familiar with things like MyChart or Health Vault. Those are digital platforms that oftentimes your healthcare provider will already use if you get an account and get yourself set up. And so this is a really great thing to consider utilizing since there's, again, platforms that most service providers are familiar with and will upload your information on. And so it's going to be a great way to get this process started of getting at least your medical records and information online. And then, of course, sentimental items, whether this is family pictures, photo albums, letters, different things along those lines are very critical to protect as well. So our deep dive here into financial and legal documents, and I'm calling out on the slide that we have a larger guide that includes checklist on our website that has examples of different documents that fall into each category. But looking at a couple examples with financial and legal, this includes things like housing records, insurance policies, homeowners or renters insurance, because certainly renters are a part of this conversation as well, flood insurance, et cetera, and a bunch of other information here that, again, this is going to be what you'll need to pull when you're submitting an insurance claim or applying for federal aid. So they're all very important, but this maybe is a really great starting point when you're looking at all the different categories of different documents to protect. How to protect them? Well, we recommend at SVP that you take a two-pronged approach. The first is physically protecting your documents. And so this includes things like waterproof safes, folders, fireproof containers, and different things like that, and storing not only the physical copies, but also backups of those copies and storing some away from home at a trusted family, friend, relative's house, at an attorney's office, in a safety deposit box at a bank, things like that. We also highly encourage folks to consider a digital methodology as well. And so this includes things like using a flash drive, different cloud storage things like the iCloud or Dropbox, et cetera. And so having this multi-pronged approach is going to go a long way to helping make sure that your records are safeguarded should you be impacted by a disaster. I will pass it over to Leanne to get us started.
Thank you, Tessa. And I know that planning for recovery can feel very overwhelming, especially with everything else you might have going on. But it's important to remember that most of the US has faced disasters in the last decade. And like Tessa mentioned, it's not a matter of if, but when. So some of these actions that we'll cover, there are things that you can do now or simply put in your back pocket for when it's the right time, or even share it with somebody else who might benefit from it. So when it comes to disaster recovery, there are typically four main sources of funding: personal savings, credit and loans, disaster aid, insurance, which we'll discuss throughout the next couple of slides. These are going to be the building blocks for financial recovery. And there are a couple of questions that can get you started with this process, such as like, which of these financial sources can I rely on for my recovery if a disaster occurs? Where does disaster planning fit in my overall financial planning? Is it something I've included, or is it something that I still need to make room for? Next slide, please. So during a disaster, we know that unexpected expenses are going to arise, such as the cost of basic necessities, clearing debris, fuel for generators or cars, sheltering for extended stays, or even traveling to a safe location. So as you work on your plan, you want to address how much on average would it cost to, let's say, travel and board your family at a family's home, maybe 2 states away. Another important thing is to save for deductibles, which is the amount you must pay out of pocket before your insurance kicks in. So you want to make sure that you have money set aside to be able to immediately access your coverage so you can kickstart your recovery. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about loans and credit, and I won't dive into specific of loan options today because I am not a financial expert, but I do want to highlight two key points here. First, consider working with a financial advisor. An advisor can walk you through your budget and financial plan. They can help you plan for unexpected expenses or maybe even what mitigation actions you want to take in your home. Second, both homeowners and renters can apply for SBA loans. Important to note that in the case that there is a presidentially declared disaster, which that means that it will trigger federal assistance for affected areas, if you apply for FEMA disaster aid, you will be first referred to SBA, which is the Small Business Administration, to determine if a loan is right for you. This often causes a lot of confusion because if you heard me just now, I said Small Business Administration. And the question that we get a lot is like, why are they giving disaster loans? So they offer a lot of low interest disaster loans to homeowners and again, renters in disaster affected areas. And you can learn more about how that works at disasterloanassistant.sba.gov. Next slide, please. So again, I know we could have homeowners or renters here, but I want to make sure that folks know if you're a renter, you can apply for disaster aid if you're eligible and also if it's available. However, it's very important for us to note today that federal assistance is very limited. Not every disaster triggers the federal declaration, as we saw at the beginning. Not everyone qualifies. The funding often doesn't meet the full need. And additionally, there are times that it could take years to get that aid to come through. So this reinforces the need to be prepared to recover on your own, like no one else is coming to help. Now, in that same vein of limited access to aid, you can take this action or if not, help somebody else to do this to verify if your home has an insurance mandate. So this means if anyone in your home, including previous owners, receive federal assistance aid for your specific property, you cannot apply for aid again unless you maintain insurance for a like event. So what does this mean? If the previous owners of your home received disaster aid for flooding and you were unaware of it, and maybe you thought, hey, it won't happen again, it was a fluke, and a flood does happen and you don't have flood insurance, you likely won't be eligible for disaster aid again. So you can reach out via the phone or the page down here and get that process started to understand if you have an insurance mandate. It doesn't take long, but it's a quick action you can take for peace of mind. Next slide, please. So let's talk about how you can maximize your FEMA award after a disaster, and this is something that you can also share with other folks. If you didn't know, if you're approved for FEMA assistance, but you feel that the amount isn't enough to support your recovery, you have the right to appeal their decision. Many people often don't realize that appealing is an option, and it can actually make a really big difference in your recovery process. One great resource is SVP's FEMA Appeals Program. They guide survivors through the appeal process and help them make sure that they have all the necessary documents that they might need, and also that they're submitted correctly, because that is often where people are often denied for FEMA or don't get as enough assistance that they probably could. So we have data that it works. Survivors who go through the program see an average of over 65% in their FEMA award, and which amounts to over $7,000 in additional funds to support their recovery. So if you know of someone or you need this assistance yourself, visit SVP's page and look up the FEMA Appeals Program. And I'll pass it over to Tessa.
All right, thanks, Leanne. We'll shift gears now, still talking about financial preparedness for disasters, but we're now going to talk a little bit about getting the right insurance. We know, and we'll share some stats that are really going to help to paint this picture a little bit later on, but we know that insurance is the best tool for recovery. So how can you make sure that you are set up for success? We'll walk through this in these next steps in a couple slides here. One, taking time in advance of a disaster to really understand what's in your policy. What are you paying for? This is a critical first step because we need to understand if there are any gaps in your policy. And we'll talk about in a little bit how you can then fill those gaps. But again, starting here, taking time to really navigate your policy. There might be some jargon, technical jargon that you have to understand. Maybe you reach out to your insurance agent to get some clarity if any points are confusing. But again, starting with understanding what's in your policy. What are you paying for? On the flip side, it is just as important and absolutely critical to understand what are you not paying for that you maybe think you are? What are those common exclusions that are, again, commonly not included in your homeowners or renters insurance coverage? We have flood as the first one here, bolded and in red, because the vast majority of homeowners and renters insurance policies do not cover flood. This is really problematic when we understand that floods are the most common and the most costly of all disaster types, and they can happen anywhere at any time. So what that means is that everyone everywhere has some level of flood risk. And if you don't have a separate flood insurance policy, again, the vast majority homeowners and renters insurance policies don't include flood. So this is a sticking point that we really want folks to take away from this presentation. So what to do from there? And here are some of those statistics that I had just previewed that were coming that are going to help to really drive home the importance of insurance as the most effective and efficient tool for recovery. At the household level, for example, we see that just 1 inch of flood water can result in at least $27,000 in damage. This is an extreme sum of money, especially for a family who maybe hasn't gone through the financial exercise of determining which financial mechanism is going to be the most effective and help you get through the recovery process. So again, if we're looking at this statistic, just 1 inch can result in at least $27,000 worth of damage. This is even more profound when we see this next bullet point here of the average FEMA disaster assistance grant for a household is just about $5,000, while on average, the amount of flood insurance payout that a household can expect to receive is just under $70,000. So of course, we see the latter of the two is going to go much further and help a family through the recovery process much better than relying on federal disaster assistance. This does not mean that we don't want folks to apply for federal assistance. We want folks to take advantage of all the resources that are out there, but it's critical to understand just how much of an impact these different pots of funding can have so you can make the most informed planning decisions. Down here, I just want to make a really important call out here. We saw at the end of last year a really incredible change with the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. Up until the end of last year, flood insurance policyholders only had the option of paying for their policy once a year. So this large annual lump sum payment. This really made it so obtaining flood insurance was not possible for families who couldn't budget for that one large payment. Well, now policyholders are able to pay for their flood insurance on a monthly basis. And so what this does is it spreads out the cost of flood insurance throughout the year. And what we really hope that this will do is help more folks be able to budget for and get the right type of insurance. So that's just a really important top tip to be aware of. So moving on here, we want to give you guys actionable guidance that once you wrap up the session today, you have this information so you can start right away taking actions to better prepare your finances for future disasters. We call this building financial disaster resilience. And this is so important because the ability to be financially prepared for a disaster underpins all aspects of recovery, but it's something that isn't talked about enough. So going through our top tips, what can we do from here? What are those first steps we want to encourage you to take? One, again, check your homeowners or your renter's insurance policy. Understand what you're paying for. Really familiarize yourself with what's being covered and what's not being covered. Two, Leanne talked about this a little bit already, but to the best of our ability, we want to set aside emergency cash that can be used for emergencies. And why is that? Well, that's because disasters are unpredictable. And so again, like Leanne said, we might be facing things like unexpected stays away from your home that are long-term. 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, etc. Also, we need to have this emergency cash set aside for our deductibles. If we want to access insurance, which is again the best tool for recovery, we need to be able to pay this deductible, which is again the key to accessing this financial resource. A really great starting point, and again, emergency cash more broadly is something that we really encourage folks to set aside. One starting point that we often recommend for folks to take, because this does not require any money, it just requires time, but that is making a home inventory. What a home inventory is pictures and videos of your home, so the structure of your home and the belongings inside of your home. And this is important because this is documentation that you may need to submit that with your insurance claim or to receive federal assistance. And so this is a step that you can take today. And we have some examples here of what this includes, but a larger guide on our website that walks you through in more detail what we encourage you to have in your home inventory. But this, again, is a great starting point for anyone that's really looking to take those first steps today. We're wrapping up here in this section, but we wanted to share out a couple of resources. We know that this can seem like information overload, especially this insurance, larger preparedness piece, which certainly includes insurance, if folks haven't thought about that yet. And so this is a slide that I definitely encourage you to take a screenshot of, or write this down. We can put some links in the chat as well, but a couple of resources. One, the National Flood Insurance Program is a really great one to stay abreast of information as different changes are happening in the federal landscape, and also just to better understand what resources are available to you. So www.floodsmart.gov. Another great resource that I recommend checking out is your state resource. So that would be the state of Texas Department of Insurance. There is a Division of Consumer Services that has a lot of important information to help you better understand, again, what resources are available to you and to help answer questions that are specific to your state. Another resource is United Policyholders, and this is a nonprofit organization that's an expert in the insurance space. And so between these three resources here, you have a lot of great information to help get you started after our session today. Before we shift gears here and continue learning about key preparedness and recovery actions, I want to just make a note that we did spend a little bit of time talking about home inventories and why those are so important to take before a disaster, to have this pre-disaster information about the state of your home, the structure, and your belongings. Well, after a disaster, we really want to also encourage you to kind of go through that same exercise, videotape your home, the structure, and the belongings inside of your home, so you have information that shows the damage that a disaster has brought to your home. And so you can do some comparing there. And this is all, again, important documentation that may come into play when you're applying to different types of funding sources. Okay, now we're going to be talking a little bit about avoiding contractor fraud, and I will pass to Leanne to get us started.
Thank you, Tessa. And contractor fraud, I know it's something that we see every other day, but it's especially very prominent after a disaster. So we're going to talk about a couple of general warning signs. And first, you encourage folks to be cautious. If someone shows up unannounced or goes door to door soliciting work, this is a common tactic. Also, if you have a good general contractor, they're going to be so busy that they don't have time to be going door by door. Next, watch out for high pressure sales tactics, unrealistic promises, or anyone who refuses to provide an ID, proof of insurance, licensing, or references. If they don't offer a written estimate or a contract, or if they're demanding cash or a large upfront payment, again, those are some major red flags that you need to look out for. Also, never share your details, please, about your insurance settlement with your contractor. And if you decide to do that, please make sure it's someone you've already vetted, someone that you trust. And be very wary if anyone tries to skip required permits or inspections. I know that can move along the process a little bit faster, but at the end of the day, it can cause costly legal or major safety issues down the road. So please keep all of that present. So if you're suspecting a scam, whether to you, a loved one, a neighbor, there's the AARP Fraud Watch Network, or if not, you can report it using their scam tracking map to help protect others too. Next slide. So a couple of tips to help you avoid contractor fraud and make informed decisions when hiring for repairs or rebuilding. And this is not only just for after a disaster. You should always collect multiple estimates. At least aim for 3 written quotes so you can compare pricing, scope, and professionalism. Before any work begins, create a home inventory. Document the condition of your property, your belongings. Photos and videos, again, are going to be very helpful in case any issues come up later. So this is similar to what Tessa was mentioning with your home inventory. There's many uses to it. Make sure that you're checking the contractor credentials. This includes verifying their license, their insurance, their references. Don't just take their word for it. Follow up and confirm. And again, this looks very different by county. So if you have any questions, feel free to call your county office. Whatever is agreed upon, make sure that you're getting it in writing. That includes the scope of work, the materials, the schedule, payment terms, and a detailed contract. So it protects you and also the contractor at the end of the day. And finally, avoid paying cash or giving large upfront deposits. Reputable contractors typically work with progress-based payments. So again, you can learn more about this at Protect Against Contractor Frauds. This is a guide that we have at our resource hub. And I'll pass it over to Tessa.
Thanks, Leanne. We're starting to wrap up here, but we're offering first some top tips for recovery because, again, a huge component of disaster preparedness, getting ready for storms and any disaster type, is knowing how to recover should one occur. So first, needing to understand who in your network, so family, friends, other loved ones, neighbors, who can you lean on, and conversely, who might need your support during a disaster. What are those resources that are available to you? And as a part of your household emergency planning, what is that first phone call that you're going to make, or first set of phone calls, and what family member is going to be responsible with making, what phone call? What ties nicely to that is really understanding and having emergency contact information for important stakeholders in your community, government authorities, emergency personnel, again, close family, friends, and others. Our recommendation here is, again, we know that we might lose power during a disaster, and so we might have all this information saved on our phones, but if your phone dies, you need to be able to still access this important contact information. So using handheld written contact cards and keeping those with you, maybe putting those in your emergency disaster supplies kit, is one great way to make sure, again, you can always access this information. We just spent time talking about insurance and how that's the best tool for recovery. Well, making sure you have the right insurance is the first step. Making sure that you can access it is just as important. And so spending time in advance, maybe talking to your insurance agent, looking at those resources that we showed a couple slides back, and understanding what does that process look like for initiating your insurance claim is critical. Leanne talked about this earlier, but again, if you're planning on relying on federal aid, which again, we want to emphasize that that is one tool, but we want to make sure that folks understand that insurance is the best tool for recovery, and also including things like loans and cash, et cetera. But understanding if you do qualify for federal aid before disaster strikes is critical. Additionally, we spent some time earlier in the session talking about important documents, organizing them and protecting them. When you're in a disaster period, this is the time that, those efforts are really going to come into play. Being able to access your documents is very important. Also, and folks on the call are absolutely plugging this into this today, but knowing that any action that you take now before disaster strikes is going to go a long way to help you become more resilient for future disasters. So that includes things like trainings, maybe utilizing SDP resources on our resource hub or other trusted authorities like FEMA, Red Cross, et cetera. And just continuing to take action to get yourself more prepared is going to go a long way. We spend some time covering household plans, making sure that you're updating them and practicing them is a large component of ensuring that you're ready for disasters. And this community cohesion, making sure that you're well plugged into your neighbors and loved ones who you may need to ask for support or who potentially you can offer support to during a disaster. We have, and I did just make this call out already, but we have a lot of resources, both preparedness and recovery, on our resource hub at SVP, and I welcome everyone to check that out once we wrap up today. So we're rounding out here. I wanted to share some local resources. And again, this is something that Leanne shared out, a couple examples of different alert systems and different things that are local to you. We'll share more information on STEER in the next slide. But please take a screenshot of this, get familiar with these different resources at the county and the city level, or our first few here. Because again, this is where you're going to go to find localized information on different risks, on incoming storms. These resources also have information on household preparedness by different disaster type, different actions you need to take before, during, and after a disaster. So again, between these different links on the screen here, there is a plethora of localized information that we really want folks to be aware of and again, familiarize yourself with. If you have curiosities about some of the risk information that was shared out specific to your area, please feel free to check out the Greater Houston community area. They have an initiative called Understanding Houston, which is a lot of really fascinating but critically important information on evolving risks to understand, which is the foundation for disaster preparedness as a whole. Zooming out here at the regional level, to the Texas Division of Emergency Management has a plethora of information, including the STEER program. And so we're offering this here. Really encourage folks to sign up and to learn more about that resource. Additionally, there is great household preparedness information offered by the Texas Department of State Health Services. And we included this one here, the Texas Department of Transportation, because this agency offers information on road closures and things of that nature, which is really going to come into play during a disaster with your emergency evacuation plan. If it is the case that you need to evacuate, you need to understand if any road closures are going to impact the emergency evacuation routes that you have picked out in advance of a disaster. So it's an important tool that will come into play that the Texas Department of Transportation has available. As we wrap up here, again, I'll show we have SBP's Resource Hub, which is a lot of great information in the form of different videos and checklists and guides and upcoming trainings and things that